For my final project, I studied Benin, Africa. Benin is on the United Nations list of developed countries due to its struggling economy, poverty-stricken communities, and inequality of potable water distribution. It's carving its path towards collapse in a way which parallels most countries in the world by rapidly depleting natural resources coupled with exponential population growth. Diamond's first factor is supported by the many indications of environmental destruction. But in order to really understand this, we need a better context of the country. Getting to know Benin. French is the official language, though others spoken include 50 indigenous languages including Fon, Yam, and Yoruba. It's located in Western Africa and has a hot and humid climate. It has 2 rainy and 2 dry seasons. For reference, it's about 1/8 the size of Nigeria, so it's pretty small for a country in Africa. Its coast lies in the Atlantic Ocean, and actually its coast used to be nicknamed the Slave Coast because it was a prominent place for slave trade ships to pick up captives. A brief history. Its colonization began back in 1650 when the English established a fort in Ouida, and over the next 250 years it was fought over by the French and the Portuguese, and the French eventually won and had colonized it entirely by 1894. However, this didn't last very long, well, I guess for about 100 years, but there was much fighting, and eventually, after it had gone through periods of just being an overseas territory of France, it sort of went through a similar path that the United States did in declaring its independence from its, quote, mother country that had colonized it. And then by 1960, it was admitted into the United Nations. It suffered through a lot of political unrest over the next 17 years, with 7 coups d'etats happening, leading up to Mathieu Carrico coming to power. He employed a political system that was a conglomerate of Marxism and Leninism, and this ultimately led to a lot of unrest from the people, and he eventually gave this up right before their first multi-candidate election in 1991, where he lost and their first elected president took power. And this led to Benin actually being considered one of Africa's most stable democracies. The demographics that we need to know for this analysis are that its average population growth rate is 2.9%, so it's about tripling every year, but it's quadrupling in urban areas. Infant mortality rate is 77%, so almost 80% of children who are birthed there live, but their fertility rate is 5%, which is so shocking to me that on average, women have 5 live births in their lifetime. Benin is one of Africa's largest producers of cotton, but this does not suit and cover all of its economic issues. There was a national decrease of income per capita of 13% between 1970 and 2008. So each household is taking in 13% less. And also, even though their agricultural GDP increased 3.8% between 2002 and 2008, the national deficit increased from 111 million to 619 million in around that same time period. Their environment and resources consist of a natural abundance of marble, timber, limestone, and offshore oil deposits. And their country was once 42% forested area, so almost half. But the deforestation rate is at 2.5% right now, and they're losing 64,000 hectares per year, which is one of the highest in the world. Benin has lost 29% of its forests since 1990. Access to water as of 2006, 53% in rural areas and 78% in urban areas. And a lack of sanitation and access to water results in outbreaks of cholera and diarrhea, especially in children. So all of this really adds up to lead us into Diamond's first factor of his framework, because the deforestation and desertification happening is at such an alarming rate, and it's to a scale that is both national and as a result of like mass production of cotton and mass agriculture to support their population that's growing super fast, but also there are a lot of minor situations that are leading people to participate in the destruction of their land, and this is having to do with Again, the water access inequity and loss of wildlife that's making it so difficult for so many families, especially in rural areas, to guarantee their families food and to guarantee their families water to survive. But what's the real issue? It's that the population's basic needs aren't being met. This leads to people furthering the environmental issues in order to survive. So, for example, in Benin, it's a common practice to hunt for a family's meal. And because of desertification and because so much of the land is getting destroyed, animals are migrating away from lands where they used to thrive sort of in tandem with the people, and they could sort of just walk out their back door, as some accounts say, and catch their family a meal. But now people are having to travel farther, and it's getting more difficult. And as a result, they're using practices like brush fires in order to scare out game, which is a really effective way, obviously, to scare animals into coming out into the open, but it's increasing and furthering the issue of desertification because it's destroying the integrity of the soil and making it difficult for it to recover. And also, the issue of water disparity, not only are people getting diseases, but it's actually taking away from women's education because women are still in their society expected to be the housekeepers. And so many women and girls are taking entire days out of their education to go walk for miles to collect water for their families. And it just kind of comes down to people who are not guaranteed to drinking water cannot be held responsible for fixing the world. These people cannot be responsible for improving their environment until they are sure that they are going to be alive to want to fix it. This is also leading to the further residual issues are the winds and the environment sort of acting like what we saw in the American Dust Bowl, with soil eroding due to the wind and dust storms sweeping through and tearing entire homes apart with it because there's no trees or soil. There's no trees to break it up and no soil that's held together enough to stop the dust from collecting. In this situation, we see globalization being very helpful because, as we saw earlier, the national deficit is increasing because they're having to rely a lot on imported goods and imported help to help fix their country. And the Beninese government is making efforts to seek foreign investors, and it has greatly contributed to fixing their water inequity. The World Bank actually contributed $68 million towards efforts to decentralize water supplies. Since this aid has taken root, the percentage of the population with access to water has grown yearly with promising results. And recently, there have been a few news articles that are referring to Benin as an African water success story. It's actually gone up to 73% of people have constant access to water in urban areas and 53% in rural areas. But that was a measure taken in 2016. And they were decentralizing water continually every year with programs, but they are progressively moving through to having to move on to sanitation issues because the primary focus has simply been getting water out there, and the disease is still running pretty rampant in the water supply. So that is their next step, and they are still relying on foreign funds to help that. This is pretty easily connected to Kiribati, that we saw earlier in the semester, because their water issues are very similar, where they needed to decentralize the water supply and take it out from the urban cities, and it's an arduous and difficult process that is imperfect. And in both cases, we saw that the poor cleansing of this transportation of this water was contributing to the disease-ridden water. Both countries also rely heavily on the importation of goods, as we saw, but a key difference in the lands is Kiribati is an island atoll, as we know, and its land is sort of birthed to be infertile. It's not really meant to support mass agriculture, but Benin, being in Africa and not being an island, not being a coral reef island, is very abundant. And therefore, it's not as affected or threatened by rising sea levels, but conversely is threatened by desertification and deforestation. And they both also suffered greatly from the effects of colonization and have had to recover from it over the years since they both won their independence in the 1900s. It seems that there is definitely a paradigm in these developing countries where once they establish themselves at all, their population booms faster than they can keep up with. And then that's when it becomes apparent that globalization is really quite helpful because of these people who need immediate help but cannot organize enough and have enough funding to help themselves when they're struggling daily just to survive. Diamond's framework really represents the struggles of Benin well because the people are struggling to survive and many of them lack in the awareness of the inadvertent effects they're having on their environment. Again, like I said, the extreme population growth is causing further pressure on the extraction of resources, and many of the resulting effects are clearly unintentional and can result in total collapse if not repaired. But it seems that the Beninese government is well on its way to improving their country and fixing these disparities in resources. And I am confident that with the direction they're heading, that once people can wake up sure that they have water, they will progress into having more sustainable practices. In fact, there are some already acting sustainable. One man by the name of Father Godfrey Zamuho is actually pioneering. He actually taught in California for a long time and then went back to help his country. And he actually taught and is informing people on zero waste farming in Benin. And it is it's a model that mirrors nature and basically converts all of the animal and food waste into energy for the farm and is actually quite cost efficient and is very healthy for the land. Going forward, this class has helped me establish a thoughtful belief system to stand on with foreign affairs. Before, I feel like my beliefs were rather flippant. I wasn't totally sure where I stood. I didn't completely understand the concept of globalization, but this class has really helped me understand and will continue to clue me in when I need to look deeper into into issues that I need to educate myself on. It's deepened my understanding of the complicated severity of environmental issues worldwide. Clearly, all these issues are multifaceted, and we have to look at it from different belief systems and different views and contextualize it within the culture of the place and where they stand and what their demographics are and what their individual struggles are. And it reminded me that there is always more to learn, but always there is a deeper perspective to be gained on topics one has already studied, because I thought that I knew a lot about the environment, but clearly there is always more to understand.